Talk about what you learned about Richard Nixon that you didn't report.
Oh, God. It's in 1998, I used to go quite often to the Neiman Fellows. A former editor of mine named Bill Kovich was the chairman, the editor of it. Bill, a wonderful man, very tough guy. I loved him. And he was the head of the Neiman Foundation. So for about 10 years, I would go once a year. And off the record, I was asked at this with a bunch of these, maybe 20 journalists from America and 15, 20 foreign journalists. Even then, a considerable number of women. I was asked about stories I didn't write. And I said, oh, God, I remember when I was at the New York Times, and I was pulled off. I was hired to do Vietnam by Abe Rosenthal, then the editor. He knew our coverage of Vietnam sucked. Watergate happened, and I stayed away from Watergate. Wilbur and Bernstein were running amok. I didn't want anything to do with it. And at some point, late in '72, I was told I had to do Watergate. You try and change in the middle. It's not so easy. But I got going, and I got to know the people in Watergate. And in '74, when Nixon left, about 5 days afterwards, I was well known for my Watergate coverage too in the New York Times. I got a call that with empirical information about Nixon had slugged his wife a couple of times when he left. And when he came back to San Clemente, within a week she was in the emergency room getting treatment.
He beat her. He beat Pat.
He punched
Nixon.
her. That's what she said.
She
came in, and I got a call. And you have to understand, the first problem you have is, if I write it, I destroy a hospital because somebody violated. Somebody who didn't like him in the hospital knew directly what happened. I mean, it was empirical information. And not charts, but empirical information. And so I was telling this in 1998, I was telling the Neiman Foundation about it, and so I didn't know what to do with it. I called Ehrlichman. John Ehrlichman was one of the 4 people indicted, along with Haldeman and Mitchell and Colson, John Mitchell, the Attorney General. And believe it or not, when you're covering a story like that, even though he did jail, he came out of jail, I stayed in touch with these guys because they know more than, and I was always, I wrote a lot of bad stories about them, I'd always call them up the night before and say, you're going to hate me again even more. And that always, at least you're straight about it. So that's one thing I always did, no sandbagging. And so we got along, and I called him, I said, what's this about beating? He said, oh, he'd done that a couple of times, and he told me sometimes about it. And when I told the students in '98, I didn't say I couldn't write it because it came from inside. I didn't want to do that. What I said was, I made a joke. I said, I was totally insensitive to the notion that that's a crime. I just wasn't I was doing foreign policy. What I said was, well, I figured if it had been one of those days and Nixon wanted to punch out Pat, he went looking for her, couldn't find her, and then bombed Cambodia instead, I got a story because I was just being a wise guy. They published it in I don't know why, they published the transcript in something called the Neiman Reports. And it came, and I wrote about it in my book because I was obtuse to the notion that it was a crime. And so I wrote about it because I thought, what the hell? I might as well, this is something that was very troubling for a lot of the women. And you could almost see the Me Too movement coming because these reporters really were mad at me. And I didn't get it. I mean, I did, but I didn't. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's very interesting. It's a minor, to me, the real problem is I never could have written it because of how I learned what happened. And I knew more than I wrote, even more than I told. You don't understand.
You mean your source?
I've got I've got
Who is your source?
Well, somebody obviously who had something to do with taking care of her. Let's put it, maybe. I didn't want to say.
Who treated?
You can't ask me that question. I have a wife that's a doctor and a daughter that's a doctor, and they take this idea of patient confidentiality seriously, as all doctors do.
We're going to go to break, then come back to this discussion. Our guest for the hour is the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh. He's just written his memoir. It's called Reporter. Stay with us.